My landlord ignored my repair requests for months, so I reported him to the housing board and he lost his license. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to report my landlord. I'm not confrontational by nature, and I usually try to handle things quietly, especially when it comes to where I live. But after months of being treated like an inconvenience instead of a tenant, I reached my breaking point. And honestly, I don't regret a single thing that happened next. So, I've been living in this one-bedroom apartment for about 3 years. It's nothing fancy, an old brick building in a pretty decent part of town. When I first moved in, the place had charm. The rent was affordable, the location was close to work, and the landlord, a guy named Rick, seemed chill. He gave me his number, said, "If you need anything, just text me." Easy enough. For the first year, everything was fine. I paid my rent on time, didn't cause any trouble, and kept the place spotless. Then one day my heater stopped working in the middle of December. It was freezing, like I could feel my breath inside, kind of cold. I texted Rick and told him what was going on. He replied, "I'll have someone take a look tomorrow." Tomorrow turned into a week. Then another week. Then another excuse. "Oh, the part's on order. My guy's been busy. I'll come by next week." I ended up using a space heater for 6 weeks before someone finally fixed it. That should have been my first red flag. Fast forward about a year later. This past spring. My bathroom ceiling started leaking after a big storm. Not a drip, but an actual stream of water coming through near the light fixture. I texted Rick again. No answer. I called him the next day. Still nothing. I emailed him thinking maybe he'd check that more often. Nothing. By the third day, I left a voicemail practically begging for a response because I was worried the ceiling would cave in. Finally, he texted back, "I'll have my handyman check it out this weekend." That handyman was his cousin. The guy showed up 3 days later, looked at the ceiling for maybe 5 minutes and said, "Yeah, looks bad. I'll tell Rick." And then left. That was it. A week later, the leak was worse and the ceiling paint started bubbling. I followed up again. Text, call, voicemail. No reply. So I started documenting everything. Photos, timestamps, even copies of my messages. I had a feeling I might need proof later, though at the time, I wasn't sure for what. It got worse in June. My bathroom light fixture shorted out completely because of the water damage. I stopped using it because I didn't want to get electrocuted. I called an electrician myself just to find out how dangerous it was, and he basically told me it needed to be fixed immediately or the ceiling could become a fire hazard. I sent Rick the electrician's written note. He ignored it. Meanwhile, the leak had spread so much that my bathroom smelled like mildew. The ceiling had this ugly brown stain that kept getting darker, and every time it rained, water came through. It was disgusting. I started feeling trapped. It wasn't like I could just move. My lease still had months left and my finances were tight. I was also worried that if I caused too much trouble, he might try to evict me out of spite. He already had this passive-aggressive way of talking to me, like whenever I texted him, I was nagging him. The breaking point came one night in July. I came home from work and part of the ceiling had collapsed. The entire corner of my bathroom was on the floor. Chunks of plaster, wet insulation, everything. It looked like a scene from a horror movie. I lost it. I called Rick immediately and told him what happened. He didn't answer. I texted him again, this time attaching a photo. He replied 2 hours later with, "Wow. That's bad. I'll have someone come by this weekend." That was on a Tuesday. I slept on my couch that night because I didn't even feel safe in my bedroom. The bathroom was right next to it and the smell was awful. The next day, I went straight to my building's office to see if there was anyone else I could talk to, but it turned out Rick owned the entire property privately. No management company, no middleman. That's when a neighbor who had overheard me venting in the hallway pulled me aside. She told me she'd been dealing with similar issues. Broken heater, leaking pipes, mold, and that Rick always ignored her too. She mentioned that a few tenants had complained to the local housing board before, and that might be my only real option. So I looked it up that night. I filled out the complaint form, attached all my photos, and included every message I had between me and Rick. I was nervous because it felt extreme, but I was out of options. I hit submit. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a housing inspector. They wanted to schedule a visit to check the apartment. I agreed immediately. The day of the inspection, the guy showed up with a clipboard and a camera. He took one look at the ceiling and just shook his head. Then he started pointing things out I hadn't even noticed. Mold forming in the corners, damaged wiring, cracks in the walls. He said he'd be writing up a full report. Within a week, Rick finally reached out to me, but not to apologize. Oh no. He called me furious. Why would you go to the housing board? You could have just waited, he yelled over the phone. I told him I had waited. For months. He started blaming me, saying I caused the damage by not ventilating the bathroom properly. I reminded him that it started from a roof leak. He hung up on me. A few days later, I got a letter from the housing board saying they found multiple violations in the building: electrical, structural, and sanitation related. Rick was ordered to make immediate repairs and was fined heavily. Apparently, they also discovered he'd been renting out several units illegally without proper licensing. That's when things escalated. I got another call from Rick, this time trying to negotiate. He offered me a month of free rent if I withdrew the complaint. He said the fines were ruining him. I told him it wasn't my problem anymore, that maybe if he had listened in the first place, it wouldn't have come to this. Then he tried guilt-tripping me. You realize people could lose their homes over this, right? You're making things worse for everyone. But when I talked to the neighbor who had first told me about the housing board, she said inspectors had visited her unit too, and that her heater and plumbing had already been repaired. She was thrilled. I realized Rick was just trying to manipulate me. A month later, I got a follow-up email from the housing board saying Rick's landlord license had been suspended pending further investigation. Eventually, it came out that he'd been cutting corners for years, ignoring safety codes, pocketing security deposits, and lying about repairs to avoid spending money. It honestly felt surreal. He showed up one last time to check on my unit before everything was turned over to a new property manager. He looked exhausted and angry. I could tell he wanted to say something nasty, but instead he muttered, "You didn't have to do this." I just looked at him and said, "You didn't have to ignore me." That shut him up. The new management company has been great so far. They fixed the ceiling, repainted everything, and even offered a rent credit for all the trouble. The apartment actually feels safe again, and for the first time in months I can shower without worrying the roof will collapse on me. Rick, on the other hand, ended up losing more than just his license. Apparently, several other tenants came forward after my report, and the city started investigating his other properties too. I heard he's facing lawsuits now. It's strange how karma works sometimes. When I look back on it, I can't believe how long I put up with it. I think I stayed quiet because I didn't want to be that tenant who complains too much. But the reality is, standing up for yourself doesn't make you difficult. It makes you responsible. If anything, I learned that silence only benefits the people taking advantage of you. And honestly, watching him face the consequences after treating us all like we didn't matter, it was more satisfying than I expected. I didn't set out to ruin his career. I just wanted a safe place to live. But if holding him accountable did that, then maybe he wasn't meant to be a landlord in the first place. I haven't seen him since, but I sometimes pass by one of his old buildings on my way to work. The for sale sign is still up, sun-faded and crooked. Every time I see it, I feel this small sense of peace, like the universe evened the score in its own quiet way. He once told me, "You have to be patient. These things take time." Well, he was right about that. Took time, but eventually things got fixed. Just not in the way he expected.